Thousands of rallies against US President Donald Trump and his administration have taken place, stretching from Washington, D.C. and Texas to Paris and Rome.
The demonstrators are opposing the US government's expansion of executive power and are also calling for the impeachment of Mr. Trump and key members of his administration. North America correspondent Rachel Clayton found this report from a march in Washington.
This is America's third No Kings protest, and it feels more charged than ever. Thousands of protesters marched along the National Mall from the Lincoln Memorial down here in front of the Washington Monument. They're demonstrating against a multitude of President Trump's policies, including immigration enforcement, the handling of the Epstein files, the rising cost of living, and of course now...
Welcome to Dr. John Podcast. What just happened right now? Millions of Americans are proving every single one of those people dead wrong. The streets are alive, the energy is electric, and Donald Trump, he is watching it all happen, and there is absolutely nothing he can do about it. This is No King's Day, the third, and it is the biggest one yet. Let that sink in for a second. Not smaller, not the same size, bigger. Every single time these people have tried to crush this movement.
The war in Iran. A number of protests have taken place in Republican strongholds like Texas and Florida, but one of the largest is in Minneapolis, the epicenter of the Trump administration's largest immigration enforcement operation, where 2 US citizens were shot dead by federal agents earlier this year.
Citizens have a responsibility to be out and make their voice heard.
I marched against the Vietnam War, I marched against the Iraq wars, I marched against Trump before, I'm marching against him now. I got to do it for my grandchildren. I got to try to save this country.
I don't want to see the American experiment fail at this point. It's been 250 years, and this would be a very sad time for it all to collapse.
It's difficult to say whether these protests are going to have a true impact on the government's policies. People in the White House have previously called these sorts of rallies Hate America demonstrations. But with the midterms coming up in just a few months, politicians would do well to pay attention.
Every single time they've sent military jets overhead to intimidate ordinary families standing on sidewalks with signs, every single time they've tried to counter-program with their own sad little military parades and chest-puffing displays of fake strength. The movement didn't shrink. It grew, it doubled, it exploded. And here we are again, watching history unfold in real time. Over 3,100 No Kings demonstrations are happening across this country as you are reading or hearing these words.
Huge crowds rallied against US President Trump on No King's Day, venting fury over the Trump administration and the war with Iran. This is the third nationwide protest in under a year from the No Kings movement. The first 2 rounds of protests drew an estimated more than 5 million people in June and 7 million in October. Minnesota took center stage in the protests, where thousands were seen holding No Kings banners. Minnesota has seen the killing of Alex Pretty and Renee Good during ICE operations against Trump's anti-immigration enforcement. Bruce Springsteen, legendary rocker singer and fierce Trump critic, performed his new protest ballad Streets of Minneapolis in St. Paul, honoring citizens killed by federal agents in immigration clashes.
Think about that number for a second. 3,100. That is roughly as many events as there are counties in the entire United States of America. This is not a protest. This is a nationwide declaration. This is we the people saying in unison from every corner of this land, no, not today, not ever. We are done. From massive coastal cities to small towns buried deep in the heartland. From southern suburbs to Midwestern Rust Belt communities. From the Pacific coast all the way, and I mean all the way, to a city inside the Arctic Circle in Alaska. Yes, inside the Arctic Circle. People bundled up in the freezing cold, standing shoulder to shoulder because they believe that deeply in what this movement stands for. That is not apathy. That is not a dying movement. That is a people on fire. And here at the Midas Touch Network, we have been with this movement from the very beginning, before it was called No Kings, before it was called Hands Off, even back when it was just small local grassroots groups quietly organizing in the weeks after the election, when most of the corporate media was still pretending everything was fine. We were there. We had cameras on the ground. We were live. Whether it was protests pushing back against ICE terror in Minnesota, in Chicago, in Charlotte, in Los Angeles, in Portland, wherever the people showed up, we showed up with them. And today is no different. Make sure you are watching our live feed on the YouTube channel, because we will be covering every major No Kings event across the country in real time, with musical performances, with joy, with power, because that is what this is. This is joyful resistance. This is what democracy looks like when it refuses to give up. Now let's talk about what this regime has done and why these protests keep getting bigger and bigger. Because the American people are not stupid. They see exactly what is happening. Donald Trump has built a wall of protection around the Epstein class, the network of the ultra-wealthy, the politically connected, the untouchable predators who have spent decades buying silence and escaping accountability. The same files that could expose the darkest corners of elite child sex trafficking rings, locked away, buried, covered up, with people like Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche doing the dirty work, quietly moving Ghislaine Maxwell to what amounts to a luxury facility, club-fed, while everyday Americans rot in overcrowded jails for minor offenses. And why? To protect the secrets, to protect Trump's own sick, dark history. Because Donald Trump himself is not some innocent bystander in all of this. He is a convicted felon. He is a documented sexual predator. And yet there he is, sitting in the most powerful office in the world, surrounded by people like Howard Lutnick, who casually admitted he visited Epstein's island and then shrugged it off by saying he brought his kids along, as if that makes it better, as if that makes it anything other than deeply, profoundly disturbing. And while all of that darkness festers behind closed doors, the American people are being told to look away. They're being handed distractions. J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, went on a right-wing propaganda show in the last 24 hours and told the American public that UFOs are not aliens. They're demons. Actual demons. That is the message coming out of the Trump White House. While grocery prices are through the roof and working families cannot afford to keep a roof over their heads. Demons and aliens. That is what they are offering you, while this regime tears the country apart. Meanwhile, Trump rushed into an unlawful war. Bombs dropped. Elementary schools hit, 165 little girls killed, desalination plants, the infrastructure that gives people drinking water, destroyed, electrical grids knocked out, war crimes committed in Iran, in Beirut, in Lebanon, in Gaza, and this regime has the absolute nerve to call itself the Peace Administration. The audacity is staggering, the cruelty is bottomless, and the American people have had enough. Inflation is not slowing down, it is surging. People cannot afford their rent. They cannot afford to buy homes. They are working 2 and 3 jobs and still falling behind. And while that happens, ICE and Border Patrol, operating more like a domestic terror force than a law enforcement agency, are out on the streets terrorizing communities, brutalizing human beings, ripping families apart. These are our neighbors. These are people who have built lives here, raised children here, contributed to this country for years, and they are being hunted. That is not an exaggeration. That is what is happening. But here is the thing about the No Kings movement that the Trump regime fundamentally does not understand and cannot seem to wrap their heads around. You do not fight this with military drills. You do not frighten this away with parades. You do not silence this by attacking the media that covers it, because every time they try, more people show up. Every single time. We expect somewhere between 15 and 20 million Americans to be in the streets today. 15 to 20 million. And here is what makes that number even more powerful. Not all of them have been with this movement from the start. Some of these people voted for Trump. Some of them believed the promises. Some of them gave him the benefit of the doubt. And then they watched. They watched what he actually did with power. They watched the con play out in real time. And they realized this man is a fraud. He was always a fraud. A con artist who promised to fight for working people while spending every waking hour serving the ultra-wealthy, covering for predators, starting wars, and dismantling the institutions that protect ordinary Americans. And now they're in the streets too. The tent is getting bigger, the movement is getting stronger, and let's be clear about what this movement stands for, because it matters to say it plainly. This is not just about being against Trump. This is about being for something, for healthcare, Real universal health care that every single American deserves as a basic human right, not a luxury for people who can afford it. For education, accessible, quality education for all, not just for the children of the wealthy. For jobs with real dignity, with union protections, with wages that actually allow people to live. For affordable housing, because the idea that a working person cannot afford to rent an apartment in the country they have poured their labor into is a moral outrage. For the uplift of marginalized communities, for genuine equality, for the radical and powerful idea that every person in this country deserves to be treated with basic human decency. That is what the No Kings movement stands for, and it is what the Midas Touch Network has always stood for, not just politically, but as a matter of human values, empathy, compassion, building something better together instead of tearing each other apart. That is the mission, and it does not stop at the American border either, because the Midas Touch Network is growing internationally now. Midas Canada. Shout out to every single Midas Maple out there. We see you and we love you. And the expansion doesn't stop there. Europe, Asia, Central America, South America, Mexico, Africa, Australia. The Midas mates are out there and we are coming to you. This is a global mission. Humanity does not have a nationality. And the fight for dignity, equality, and democracy is not limited to one country. Now, back here at home, let's talk about where MAGA actually stands right now, because the data tells a very interesting story. CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, the flagship gathering of the American right, just wrapped up in Texas. And the energy, described by people who were actually inside the room as bizarre, low, hollow, even attendees who showed up to that event were openly expressing their disillusionment with Trump. That is not the description of a movement at its peak. That is the description of something running out of gas. And then there is the regime's response to the Midas Touch Network specifically, because apparently we have become a major target. This past week, Brendan Carr, the FCC commissioner, along with Stephen Chung, Trump's communications director, and Caroline Leavitt, all took time out of their day to mock and attack this network. They did it because we hired Scott McFarland, a veteran journalist who left CBS News and brought his incredible reporting to the Midas Touch Network. His work has been outstanding. His YouTube channel has been absolutely crushing it. And the regime's response was to attack us. Here is what happened as a result of that attack. Record growth. 7 consecutive weeks as the #1 podcast in the country. #1 on the YouTube charts. Again, beating Joe Rogan, beating Candace Owens, beating Tucker Carlson, beating CBS and Fox News. None of that is luck. Every single bit of it is because of you, the people who show up, who share, who subscribe, who refuse to let independent pro-democracy media get drowned out. Someone once said the revolution won't be televised. Vanity Fair put it better. It'll be on the Midas Touch Network. And speaking of Rogan, even he cannot ignore what is happening. Joe Rogan, whose audience has been one of the key pipelines of MAGA culture, recently looked at the people running this movement and said, "They're all dorks." His words, "They are all dorks." When you have lost Joe Rogan's respect, you have truly bottomed out. And how did J.D. Vance respond to being called a dork by Joe Rogan? Exactly the way you would expect a man with no genuine self-awareness to respond. Watch the clip. Our on-the-ground team in Washington, D.C., led by Pablo Rodriguez, who runs our Capitol Hill bureau, has been getting real answers from real members of Congress about what is actually happening behind the scenes. Congressman McGovern spoke to us about the latest cynical games being played around TSA funding, the regime manufacturing a crisis, threatening to defund the agency that keeps air travelers safe, and then dangling funding like a reward for compliance. It is hostage politics. Plain and simple. Congresswoman Bellan gave us her assessment of the broader picture. And Congressman Gomez spoke directly about the ICE terror campaign being waged against communities across this country. These are not abstract political debates. These are real people, real families, real lives being upended by a regime that has mistaken cruelty for strength and chaos for governance. And then there is Trump himself. In the midst of all of this, the protests, the wars, the economic pain, the cover-ups, Donald Trump stood up and said, and I want you to really absorb this. Perhaps we are now respected like never before. We are so hot as can be. That's it. That is the statement. That is the man. While millions of Americans pour into the streets to say that they reject everything his administration represents, while families struggle to pay for groceries and gas, while communities live in fear of the knock on the door, he is telling himself he has never been hotter. That is the level of delusion we are dealing with. That is the man who thinks a military parade is a substitute for governing. That is the con artist who wrapped himself in a flag and sold the American people a lie. And every time he opens his mouth like that, it does not demoralize me. I want to be honest with you about that. It fuels me. It reminds me why this matters. It reminds me why every camera we put in the streets, every reporter we send to Capitol Hill, every live stream we run from protest to protest, all of it matters. Because the alternative is silence. And silence is exactly what they want. So here is where we stand today. No Kings 3, the largest one yet. Over 3,100 events, all 50 states, every county. 15 to 20 million people standing up and saying, not on our watch, not in our country, not to our democracy. This movement is not slowing down, it is not burning out, it is not going anywhere, and neither are we. We will be there live. We will cover every moment. And when the history books are written about this era, about what the American people did when authoritarianism came knocking, they will say we showed up. Every single time we showed up.